The Revolt of Islam by Shelley, Canto 3. What thoughts had sway O Cythna's lonely slumber that night, I know not, but my own did seem as if they might 10,000 years outnumber of waking life, the visions of a dream which hid in one dim gulf the troubled stream of mind, a boundless chaos wild and vast, whose limits yet were never memory's theme, and I lay struggling as its whirlwinds passed, sometimes for rapture sick, sometimes for pain aghast. 2 hours whose mighty circle did embrace more time than might make grey the infant world, rolled thus a weary and tumultuous space, when the third came, like mist on breezes curled, from my dim sleep a shadow was unfurled. Methought upon the threshold of a cave I sate with Cythna drooping bryony pearled, with dew from the wild streamlet's shattered wave, hung where we sate to taste the joys which nature gave. We lived a day as we were wont to live, but nature had a robe of glory on, and the bright arrow of every shape did weave intenser hues, so that the herbless stone, the leafless bough, among the leaves alone, had being clearer than its own could be, and Cythna's pure and radiant self was shown in this strange vision, so divine to me, that if I loved before, now love was agony. Morn fled, noon came, evening, then night descended, and we prolonged calm talk beneath the sphere of the calm moon, when suddenly was blended with our repose a nameless sense of fear, and from the cave behind I seemed to hear sounds gathering upwards, accents incomplete, and stifled shrieks, and now more near and near, a tumult and a rush of throbbing feet, the cavern's secret depths beneath the earth did beat. The scene was changed, and away, 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 through the air and over the sea we sped, and Cythna in my sheltering bosom lay, and the winds bore me through the darkness spread. Around the gaping earth then vomited legions of foul and ghastly shapes, which hung upon my flight, and ever as we fled they plucked at Cythna. Soon to me then clung a sense of actual things, those monstrous dreams among. And I lay struggling in the impotence of sleep, while outward life had burst its bound, though still deluded strove the tortured sense to its dire wanderings to adapt the sound which in the light of morn was poured around our dwellings. Breathless, pale, and unaware I rose, and all the cottage crowded found with armed men whose glittering swords were bare, and whose degraded limbs the tyrant's garb did wear. And ere with rapid lips and gathered brow I could demand the cause, a feeble shriek, it was a feeble shriek, faint, far, and low, arrested me. My mien grew calm and meek, and grasping a small knife I went to seek that voice among the crowd. 'Twas Cythna's cry, beneath most calm resolve did agony wreak its whirlwind rage, so I passed quietly till I beheld where bound that dearest child did lie. I started to behold her for delight and exultation and a joyance free, solemn, serene, and lofty, filled the light of the calm smile with which she looked on me, so that I feared some brainless ecstasy, wrought from that bitter woe, had bewildered her. Farewell, farewell, she said, as I drew nigh. At first my peace was marred by this strange stir. Now I am calm as truth, its chosen minister. Look not so, Laon, say farewell in hope. These bloody men are but the slaves who bear their mistress to her task. It was my scope, the slavery where they drag me now to share, and among captives willing chains to wear. A while the rest thou knowest return, dear friend. Let our first triumph trample the despair, which would ensnare us now, for in the end, in victory or in death, our hopes and fears must blend. These words had fallen on my unheeding ear, whilst I had watched the motions of the crew with seeming careless glance. Not many were around her, for their comrades just withdrew to guard some other victim. So I drew my knife, and with one impulse, suddenly, all unaware, 3 of their number slew, and grasped forth by the throat, and with a loud cry, my countrymen invoked to death or liberty. What followed then I know not, for a stroke on my raised arm and naked head came down, filling my eyes with blood. When I awoke, I felt that they had bound me in my swoon, and up a rock which overhangs the town by the steep path were bearing me. Below, the plain was filled with slaughter overthrown. The vineyards and the harvests and the glow of blazing roofs shone far over the white ocean's flow. Upon that rock a mighty column stood, whose capital seemed sculptured in the sky, which to the wanderers o'er the solitude of distant seas, from ages long gone by, had made a landmark. O'er its height to fly, scarcely the cloud, the vulture, or the blast has power, and when the shades of evening lie on earth and ocean, its carved summits cast the sunken daylight far through the aerial waste. They bore me to a cavern in the hill, beneath that column, and unbound me there, and one did strip me stark, and one did fill a vessel from the putrid pool. One bare a lighted torch, and 4 with friendless care guided my steps the cavern paths along. Then up a steep and dark and narrow stair we wound, until the torch's fiery tongue amid the gushing day beamless and pallid hung. They praised me to the platform of the pile, that column's dizzy height, the grate of brass through which they thrust me, open stood the while, as to its ponderous and suspended mass, with chains which eat into the flesh, alas, with brazen links my naked limbs they bound. The grate, as they departed to repass, with horrid clangour fell, and the far sound of their retiring steps in the dense gloom was drowned. The noon was calm and bright around that column. The overhanging sky and circling sea spread forth in silentness profound and solemn. The darkness of brief frenzy cast on me, so that I knew not my own misery. The islands and the mountains in the day, like clouds reposed afar, and I could see the town among the woods below that lay, and the dark rocks which bound the bright and glassy bay. It was so calm that scarce the feathery weeds sown by some eagle on the topmost stone swayed in the air, so bright that moon did breed no shadow in the sky beside mine and the shadow of my chain alone, below the smoke of roofs filled in flame, rested like night. All else was clearly shown in that broad glare, yet sound to me none came, but of the living blood that ran within my frame. The peace of madness fled, and too soon a ship was lying on the sunny main. Its sails were flagging in the breathless moon. Its shadow lay beyond that sight again, waked with its presence in my tranced brain. The stings of a known sorrow keen and cold. I knew that ship bore Cythna's o'er the plain of waters to her blighting slavery sold, and watched it with such thoughts as must remain untold. I watched until the shades of evening wrapped earth like an exultation. Then the bark moved, for that calm was by the sunset snapped. It moved a speck upon the ocean dark. Soon the wan stars came forth, and I could mark its path no more. I sought to close mine eyes, but like the balls their lids were stiff and stark. Would have risen, But ere that I could rise, my parched skin was split with piercing agonies. I gnawed my brazen chain and sought to sever its adamantine links, that I might die. O liberty, forgive the base endeavour, forgive me, if reserved for victory, the champion of thy faith ere sought to fly. That starry night with its clear silence sent tameless resolve, which laughed at misery into my soul, linked remembrance lent to that such power to me, such a severe content. To breathe, to be, to hope, or to despair and die, I questioned not, nor, though the sun, its shafts of agony, kindling through the air, moved over me, nor, though in evening done, or when the stars their visible courses run, or morning the wide universe was spread in dreary calmness round me, did I shun its presence, nor seek refuge with the dead, from one faint hope whose flower a dropping poison shed. 2 days thus passed, I neither raved nor died. Thirst raged within me like a scorpion's nest, built in mine entrails. I had spurned aside the water vessel, while despair possessed my thoughts, and now no drop remained. The uprest of the third sun brought hunger, but the crust which had been left was to my craving breast fuel, not food. I chewed the bitter dust, and bit my bloodless arm, and licked the brazen rust. My brain began to fail when the fourth morn burst o'er the golden isles, a fearful sleep, which through the caverns dreary and forlorn of the riven soul sent its foul dreams to sweep with whirlwind swiftness, a fall far and deep, a gulf, a void, a sense of senselessness. These things dwelt in me, even as shadows keep their watch in some dim charnel's loneliness, a shoreless sea, a sky sunless and planetless. The forms which peopled this terrific trance I will remember like a choir of devils around me. They involved a giddy dance. Legions seemed gathering from the misty levels of ocean to supply those ceaseless revels, foul, ceaseless shadows. Thought could not divide the actual world from these entangling evils, which so bemocked themselves that I described all shapes like mine own self, hideously multiplied. The sense of day and night, or false and true, was dead within me, yet 2 visions burst that darkness. One, as since that hour I knew, was not a phantom of the realms accursed, where then my spirit dwelt, but of the first I know not yet, was in a dream or no, but both, though not distincter, were immersed in hues, which when through memory's waste they flow, make their divided streams more bright and rapid now. Methought the great was lifted, and the 7 who brought me thither 4 stiff corpses bare, and from the frieze to the 4 winds of heaven hung them on high by their entangled hair. Swarthy were they, the 4th was very fair. As they retired, the golden moon upsprung, and eagerly out in the giddy air, leaning, and I might eat, I stretched and clung over the shapeless depth in which those corpses hung. A woman's shape, now lank and cold and blue, the dwelling of the many-coloured worm, hung there, the white and hollow cheek I drew to my dry lips. What radiance did inform those horny eyes? Whose was that withered form? Alas, alas, it seemed the Cythna's ghost laughed. In those looks and in that flesh was warm within my teeth a whirlwind keen as frost, then in its sinking gulfs my sickening spirit tossed. Then seemed it that a tameless hurricane arose and bore me in its dark career beyond the sun, beyond the stars that wane, on the verge formless space it languished there, and dying left a silence lone and drear, more horrible than famine in the deep. The shape of an old man did then appear, stately and beautiful, that dreadful sleep. His heavenly smiles dispersed, and I could wake and weep. And when the blinding tears had fallen, I saw that column and those corpses, and the moon, and felt the poisonous tooth of hunger gnaw my vitals. I rejoiced as if the boon of senseless death would be accorded soon, when from that stony gloom a voice arose, solemn and sweet, as when low winds attune the midnight pines. The grate did then unclose, and on that reverend form the moonlight did repose. He struck my chains and gently spake, and smiled as they were loosened by that hermit old. Mine eyes were of their madness half beguiled. To answer those kind looks he did enfold his giant arms around me to uphold my wretched frame, my scorched limbs. He wound in linen moist and balmy, and as cold as dew to drooping leaves. The chain with sound like earthquake through the chasm of that steep stair did bound. As lifting me it fell. What next I heard were billows leaping on the harbour bar, and the shrill sea wind whose breath idly stirred my hair. I looked abroad and saw a star shining beside a sail, and distant far that mountain and its column, the known mark of those who in the wide deep wandering are, so that I feared some spirit fell and dark in trance had lain me thus within a fiendish bark. For now indeed over the salt sea billow I sailed, yet dared not look upon the shape of him who ruled the helm, although the pillow for my light head was hollowed in his lap, and my bare limbs his mantle did enwrap. Fearing it was a friend, at last he bent o'er me his aged face as if to snap those dreadful thoughts the gentle grandsire bent, and to my inmost soul his soothing looks he sent. A soft and healing potion to my lips, at intervals he raised, now looked on high, to mark if yet the starry giant dips his zone in the dim sea. Now cheeringly, though he said little, did he speak to me. It is a friend beside thee, take good cheer, poor victim, thou art now at liberty. I joyed as those a human tone to hear, who in cells deep and lone have languished many a year. A dim and feeble joy, whose glimpses oft were quenched in a relapse of bewildering dreams. Yet still methought we sailed until aloft the stars of night grew pallid, and the beams of morn descended on the ocean streams. And still that aged man, so grand and mild, tended me, even as some sick mother seems to hang in hope over a dying child, till in the azure east darkness again was piled. And then the night wind, steaming from the shore, sent odours dying sweet across the sea, and the swift boat, the little waves which bore, were cut by its keen keel, though slantingly. Soon I could hear the leaves sigh, and could see the myrtle blossoms starring the dim grove, as past the pebbly beach the boat did flee, on sidelong wing into a silent cove, where ebon pines a shade under the starlight wove. Canto 4. The old man took the oars, and soon the bark smote on the beach beside a tower of stone. It was a crumbling heap, whose portal dark with blooming ivy trails was overgrown. Upon those floor the spangling sands were strown, and rarest seashells with the eternal flood, slave to the mother of the months, had thrown within the walls of that grey tower, which stood a changeling of man's art, nursed amid nature's brood. When the old man his boat had anchored, he wound me in his arms with tender care, and very few but kindly words he said, and bore me through the tower adown a stair, whose smooth descent some ceaseless step to where for many a year had fallen. We came at last to a small chamber, which with mosses rare was tapestried, where me his soft hands placed upon a couch of grass and oak leaves interlaced. The moon was darting through the lattices, its yellow light warm as the beams of day, so warm that to admit the dewy breeze the old man opened them. The moonlight lay upon a lake whose waters wove their play, even to the threshold of that lonely home. Within was seen, in the dim wavering ray, the antique sculptured roof, and many a tome, whose lore had made that sage all that he had become. The rock-built barrier of the sea was past, and I was on the margin of a lonely lake, amid the forests vast and snowy mountains. Did my spirit wake from sleep, as many-coloured as the snake that girds eternity in life and truth? Might not my heart its cravings ever slake? Was Cythna then a dream, and all my youth, and all its hopes and fears, and all its joy and ruth? Thus madness came again, a milder madness, which darkened naught but time's unquiet flow, with supernatural shades of clinging sadness. That gentle hermit in my helpless woe, by my sick couch was busy to and fro, like a strong spirit, ministrant of good. When I was healed, he led me forth to show the wonders of his sylvan solitude, and we together sate by that isle-fretted flood. He knew his soothing words to weave with skill from all my madness told. Like mine own heart of Cythna would he question me, until that thrilling name had ceased to make me start. From his familiar lips it was not art, of wisdom and of justice when he spoke, when mid soft looks of pity there would dart a glance as keen as is the lightning's stroke, when it doth rive the knots of some ancestral oak. Thus slowly from my brain the darkness rolled, my thoughts their due array did reassume, through the enchantments of that old hermit. Then I bethought me of the glorious doom of those who sternly struggle to relume the lamp of hope on man's bewildered lot, and sitting by the waters in the gloom of eve, to that friend's heart I told my thought, that heart which had grown old but had corrupted not. That hoary man had spent his lifelong age in converse with the dead, who leave the stamp of ever-burning thoughts on many a page. When they are gone into the senseless damp of graves, his spirit thus became a lamp of splendour, like to those on which it fed through peopled haunts, the city and the camp. Deep thirst for knowledge had his footsteps led, and all the ways of men among mankind he read. But custom maketh blind and obdurate, the loftiest hearts he had beheld the woe in which mankind was bound, but deemed that fate which made them abject would preserve them so, and in such faith some steadfast joy to know. He sought this cell, but when fame went abroad, that one in Agolis did undergo torture for liberty, and that the crowd high truths from gifted lips had heard and understood, and that the multitude was gathering wide, his spirit leaped within his aged frame. In lonely peace he could no more abide, but to the land on which the victor's flame had fed, my native land, the hermit came. Each heart was there a shield, and every tongue was a sword of truth. Young Lion's name rallied their secret hopes, though tyrants sung hymns of triumphant joy our scattered tribes among. He came to the lone column on the rock, and with his sweet and mighty eloquence the hearts of those who watched it did unlock, and made them melt in tears of penitence. They gave him entrance fee to bear me thence. Since this, the old man said, 7 years are spent, while slowly truth on thy benighted sense has crept. The hope which wildered it has lent, meanwhile, to me, the power of a sublime intent. Yes, from the records of my youthful state, and from the lore of bards and sages old, from whatsoever my wakened thoughts create, out of the hopes of thine aspirings bold, have I collected language to unfold truth to my countrymen, from shore to shore. Doctrines of human power my words have told. They have been heard, and men aspire to more than they have ever gained or ever lost of yore. In secret chambers parents read and weep my writings to their babes no longer blind, and young men gather when their tyrants sleep and vows of faith each to the other bind, and marriageable maidens who have pined with love till life seems melting through their look, a warmer zeal, a nobler hope now find, and every bosom thus is wrapped and shook like autumn's mirrored leaves in one swoln mountain brook. The tyrants of the golden city tremble at voices which are heard about the streets. The ministers of fraud can scarce dissemble the lies of their own heart, but when one meets another at the shrine he inly weeps. Though he says nothing, but the truth is known, murderers are pale upon the judgment seats, and gold grows vile even to the wealthy crone, and laughter fills the fane, and curses shake the throne. Kind thoughts and mighty hopes and gentle deeds abound for fearless love, and the pure law of mild equality and peace succeeds to faiths which long have held the world in awe, bloody and false and cold as whirlpools draw all wrecks of ocean to their chasm, and sway of thy strong genius, Laon, which foresaw this hope, compels all spirits to obey, which round thy secret strength now throng in wide array. For I have been thy passive instrument. As thus the old man spake, his countenance gleamed on me like a spirit's. Thou hast lent to me to all the power to advance towards this unforeseen deliverance. From our ancestral chains, aye, thou didst rear that lamp of hope on high, which time nor chance nor change may not extinguish, and my share of good, as was o'er the world, its gathered beams to bear. But I, alas, am both unknown and old, and though the woof of wisdom I know well, to die in hues of language, I am cold in seeming, and the hopes which inly dwell, my manners note that I did none repel, but lay a name to the tumultuous strong, we're like the star whose beams the waves compel, and tempests and his soul subduing tongue were as a lance to quell the mailed crest of wrong. Perchance blood need not flow, if thou at length would rise, perchance the very slaves would spare their brethren and themselves. Great is the strength of words, for lately did a maiden fair, who from her childhood has been taught to bear the tyrant's heaviest yoke, arise and make her sex the law of truth and freedom hear, and with these quiet words, for thine own sake, I prithee spare me, did with Ruth so take. All hearts, and even the torturer who had bound her meek calm frame, ere it was yet impaled, loosened her weeping then, nor could be found one human hand to harm her unassailed. Therefore she walks through the great city, veiled in virtue's adamantine eloquence, gainst scorn and death and pain thus trebly mailed, and blending in the smiles of that defence, the serpent and the dove, wisdom and innocence. The wild-eyed woman shrong around her path, from their luxurious dungeons, from the dust of meaner thralls, from the oppressor's wrath, or the caress of this sated lust. They congregate, in her they put their trust. The tyrants send their armed slaves to quell her power. They even like a thunder gust caught by some forest, bend beneath the spell of that young maiden's speech, and to their chiefs rebel. Thus she doth equal laws and justice teach to women outraged and polluted long, gathering the sweetest fruit in human reach. For those fair hands, now free while armed wrong, trembles before her look, though it be strong. Thousands thus dwell beside her virgins bright, and matrons with their babes a stately throng. Lovers renew their vows which they did plight in early faith, and hearts long parted now unite. And homeless orphans find a home near her, and those poor victims of the proud no less, fair wrecks on whom the smiling world with stir thrusts the redemption of its wickedness. In squalid huts and in its palaces sits lust alone, while o'er the land is born her voice, whose awful sweetness doth repress all evil, and her foes relenting turn, and cast the vote of love in hope's abandoned urn. So in the populous city a young maiden has baffled havoc of the prey which he marks as his own. whenever with chains her laden men make their arms to hurl down tyranny, false arbiter between the bound and free, and o'er the land in hamlets and in towns the multitudes collect tumultuously and throng in arms, but tyranny disowns their claim and gathers strength around its trembling thrones. Blood soon, although unwillingly, to shed, the free cannot forbear, the queen of slaves, the hoodwinked angel of the blind and dead, custom with iron mace points to the graves, where her own standard desolately waves, over the dust of prophets and of kings, many yet stand in her array, she paves her path with human hearts, and o'er it flings the wildering gloom of her immeasurable wings. There is a plain beneath the city's wall, bounded by misty mountains, wide and vast. Millions there lift at freedom's thrilling call. 10,000 standards wide, they load the blast, which bears one sound of many voices past, and startles on his throne their sceptred foe. He sits amid his idle pomp aghast, and that his power hath passed away doth know. Why pause the victor's swords to seal his overthrow? The tyrant's guards resistance yet maintain, fearless and fierce and hard as beasts of blood. They stand a speck amid the peopled plain. Carnage and ruin have been made their food. From infancy ill has become their good, and for its hateful sake their will has wove the chains which eat their hearts. The multitude surrounding them with words of human love seek from their own decay their stubborn minds to move. Over the land is felt a sudden pause, as night and day those ruthless bands around. The watch of love is kept, a trance which awes the thoughts of men with hope, as when the sound of whirlwind, whose fierce blast the waves and clouds confound, dies suddenly. The mariner in fear feels silence sink upon his heart thus bound. The conquerors pause, and oh, may freemen ne'er clasp the relentless knees of dread, the murderer. If blood be shed, 'tis but a change and choice of bonds, from slavery to cowardice, a wretched fall. Uplift thy charmed voice, pour on these evil men the love that lies hovering within those spirit-soothing eyes. Arise, my friend, farewell. As thus he spake, from the green earth lightly I did arise, as one out of dim dreams that doth awake, and looked upon the depth of that reposing lake. I saw my countenance reflected there, and then my youth fell on me like a wind, descending on still waters by thin hair, was prematurely grey, and my face was lined with channels such as suffering leaves behind. Not age, my brow was pale, but in my cheek and lips a flush of gnawing fire did find their food and dwelling, though mine eyes might speak a subtle mind and strong within a frame thus weak. And through their lustre now was spent and faded, yet in my hollow looks and withered mane, the likeness of a shape for which was braided the brightest woof of genius, still was seen, one whom methought had gone from the world's scene, and left it vacant. 'Twas her lover's face, it might resemble her, it once had been the mirror of her thoughts, and still the grace which her mind's shadow cast left there a lingering trace. What then was I? She slumbered with the dead. Glory and joy and peace had come and gone. Doth the cloud perish when the beams are fled, which steeped its skirts in gold? Or dark and lone, doth it not through the paths of night unknown, on outspread wings of its own wind upborne, pour rain upon the earth? The stars are shown when the cold moon sharpens her silver horn under the sea, and make the wide night not forlorn. Strengthened in heart, yet sad, that aged man I left, with interchange of looks and tears, and lingering speech, and to the camp began my war, o'er many a mountain chain, which rears its 100 crests aloft. My spirit bears my frame, on many a dale and many a moor, and gaily now meseems serene, earth wears the blossomy spring's star-bright investiture, a vision which aught sad from sadness might allure. My powers revived within me, and I went, as one whom winds waft o'er the bending grass, through many a vale of that broad continent. At night, when I reposed, fair dreams did pass before my pillow, my own Cythna, Was not like a child of death among them ever. When I arose from rest, a woeful mass that gentlest sleep seemed from my life to sever, as if the light of youth were not withdrawn forever. I, as I went, that maiden who had reared the torch of truth, afar, of whose high deeds the hermit in his pilgrimage had heard, haunted my thoughts. Our hope its sickness feeds, with whatsoever it finds, or flowers or weeds. Could she be Cythna? Was that corpse a shade? Such a self-torturing thought from madness breeds. Why was this hope not torture? Yet it made a light around my steps, which would never fade.